Awesome. Welcome to another edition of the African Debates channel. Today we are going to be discussing the problem of evil and suffering in ancient and present-day Africa in light of African traditional religion. And we're going to be looking at the reflections of a Christian and an atheist. With me, I have Charles Wandalo, who is going to be debating as the Christian, and Ssemakula Mukiibi, who is also going to be debating as the atheist. So for the debate, you're going to be starting with 15-minute opening statement, starting with Ssemakula, and then Charles to follow thereafter. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ssemakula to take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to put this in line with the presentation I added. So let's look at this as well. Yeah, we're looking at evil, good, suffering in the African context. I have looked at it mainly from the point of view of both African tradition and the now predominant Christian tradition. African tradition was a bit strange because we do not have one African monolithic system as per se. You cannot say that this specific system is African and this one is not. They all have their own unique beliefs about the place of good, evil, and suffering, but there are a few similarities which I shall look at in this. Christianity, on the other hand, we all know, is a monotheistic religion with the central point of Jesus, his death, and resurrection. Jesus Christ was considered the Son of God. He came to earth to save us from sin and death, and therefore evil itself should, in theory at least, have been banished by the actions of Jesus on the cross. The Bible is the primary text for Christianity, and most of the beliefs in Christianity come from the Bible. In order to look at evil, we need to look at good as well. Good generally refers to something that is considered positive, desirable, morally right, or maybe actions and behaviors that are morally right and aligned with the commonly accepted values in the society. Honesty, fairness, respect for others. And on the other hand, in the context of health, good may refer to the physical or mental well-being, where a person is free from illness and disease. Evil, on the other hand, is associated generally with intentional wrongdoing, harm or suffering caused to others, or a disregard for moral or ethical principles. In certain religions, Christianity being one of them, it is considered as deliberate opposition to the God or the will of the gods. Evil is often seen as a force of power that opposes goodness, truth, justice, and seeks to promote chaos, destruction, and suffering. This is mainly in the monolithic religions, what we normally call the Abrahamic. I'm going to conflate the two versions, African thought and Christian theology. I'm not going to read everything that I've written there. People can read for themselves if you're looking there. In African tradition, most African tradition, evil and good are balancing act. In the sense that they are all a necessary part of existence. They are part of life, part of existence, and you can't live without good or evil. So the aim of life is basically to maintain a balance between the good and evil so you can have an harmonious existence. In Christian theology, evil and suffering are often attributed to the concept of original sin. Humanity was created as good and perfect. So, at least in Christian theology, at the beginning, there never was anything like evil. But when Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, evil entered the world. And thus the separation between humanity and God ended up being creating the presence of evil and suffering in this world. African religion views evil as something that arises from a disruption of the balance between the spiritual and the physical world. So evil, yes, can create harm, illness, suffering to individuals. However, suffering is usually seen as a consequence of one's actions or the actions of others, though it can also be seen as a test of one's faith and endurance. Christians, on the other hand, believe that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and therefore the existence of suffering is often seen as a mystery that cannot be fully understood. It is also believed in many Christian thoughts that God can use suffering to bring about good, and that suffering itself can be a means of spiritual growth and positive transformation. African religions, many of them believe in the existence of spirits, both malevolent and benevolent. So these spirits can influence the lives of individuals, communities, causing both good and bad outcomes. So in general, the African religions worked on maintaining good relationships with the spirits through rituals, offerings, sacrifices, as a way to present evil and promote the well-being of the society. In Christian theology, on the other hand, the suffering of Jesus on the cross is seen as a key example of how suffering can be redemptive. Jesus' death is believed to have atoned for the sins, and that's the evil of humanity, and to have opened the way for salvation, eternal life, and hopefully the banishment of evil. Please note, I am not a pastor, so I may not believe half of what is said there. There are several ways in which African religions suggest that individuals can overcome evil. Through the usual ritual practices such as offerings, sacrifices, prayers, and these are often used to appease the spirits and their ancestors and to seek their protection and guidance. They are also believed to have the power to drive away evil forces and negative. Christians also, like Africans actually, believe in the power of prayer. However, they add the role of the church in ministering to those who are suffering. African traditions also suggest that individuals and communities can overcome evil through the cultivation of positive values and virtues. Essentially, in African communities, the community itself, the interaction between individuals could help alleviate the evil in the world, the negative influences of evil forces. Similarly, the Bible teaches that Christians should be compassionate and caring to those who are in need, and they should seek to alleviate suffering and promote justice and peace in the world. So in a way, many of these ideas are very similar across both theologies. Ultimately, the goal in African traditional religions is to maintain a harmonious relationship with the spiritual world and to live in balance with nature and the community. By doing so, individuals and communities can overcome evil and achieve a state of well-being and prosperity. So the goal in African traditional thought is not to banish evil, but to maintain a balance with both. On Christian theology, there is a belief that God is ultimately in control and good will triumph over evil with the second coming of their Lord Jesus Christ. So unlike the African thing where you want to maintain a balance between good and evil and harmonious life between the spiritual world and the physical world, in the Christian world, it is believed that eventually evil will no longer exist when the second coming of God, Lord Jesus Christ happens. The concept of evil can also be subjective. What one person or society considers to be evil may differ from another. Cultural, social, historical factors can influence the way people understand and define evil. However, as we have seen so far, there are vast similarities between African traditions and Christian thought. Some people postulate that this could possibly be because Christian thought borrowed ideas from the earlier African societies that they lived in the past. To give you specific examples, murder, for example, we don't have any known society that has openly and universally considered murder to be good. However, there are instances where specific groups or individuals within the society have justified or glorified acts of violence and killing. If we go through the Bible, we will find situations where killing was justified, mass murder actually was justified. A quick example is Sodom and Gomorrah. Some societies, such as the Exits, practice human sacrifice, and it was a way of appeasing the gods. However, murder is generally across most human societies seen as harmful and immoral. When we come to something like adultery, there have been so many societies throughout history that are more permissive attitudes towards adultery. And it was not always considered to be a moral or social taboo. In some African societies, Asian and the Pacific Islands, adultery was not always viewed as a moral transgression, especially if it occurred in the context of an informal or extramarital relationship, what I think in Kenya we now call mpango ya kando. And then in some societies, the practice of polygamy, polygamy and have more fluid definitions of marriage and sexual relationships. Native American tribes, cultures in Polynesia, adultery was not viewed as a serious offense, as long as it did not disturb. Hello? Oh, sorry. As long as it did not disrupt the stability of the family unit or even the social order. In other words, adultery was considered more or less permissible if we still maintain harmony within the society as opposed to creating strife between different sections of the society. Then there is blasphemy. Blasphemy is showing disrespect or contempt for religious beliefs or practices. And many societies, especially in the Western school of thought, have considered it a serious offense. However, there have been many societies where blasphemy is not always viewed as a moral or social taboo, or even where the concept itself did not exist. Many indigenous African religions do not have the concept of blasphemy at all, as they believe that the spirits and the ancestors are approachable and can be communicated with directly. Again, some traditional religions in Asia, such as Hinduism and Buddhism, do not have strict rules regarding blasphemy, as they are more focused on personal spiritual practices and beliefs. And there's a great anathema in current Africa called homosexuality. There have been and are currently societies that do not consider homosexuality to be evil or immoral. The perception of homosexuality as a moral or social taboo has varied widely across cultures and throughout history. In some traditional societies, homosexuality was accepted and even celebrated as part of religious and cultural practice. Native American tribes, individuals identified as two-spirit or having as a non-binary gender identity, were considered to have special spiritual gifts and were often revered as healers or mediators between the physical and spiritual world. The reason behind all this was to show you the mutability of evil and good across societies, where the fact that certain acts are considered evil in a current society does not necessarily mean that these acts were always considered evil, or even that these acts should be considered evil in our current society. Personally, I'm of the belief that acts can only be considered evil when they impact the well-being of other people in the society directly. Where the acts you do damage the well-being of somebody else or the society itself, but not in circumstances where the acts themselves do not have a victim. For example, blasphemy and homosexuality are some of the acts that I believe cannot be considered either good or evil, in the sense that they are simply acts. Because we don't have a victim on these ones, and it doesn't make sense to start applying these labels to these acts. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me on this. However, yeah, that is my view of this discussion was meant to concentrate mainly on African beliefs and Christianity, and thus I have limited myself mainly to that. But I will, in passing, comment that among the non-theistic beliefs like humanism and so on, there is a strong drive to define evil in terms of its effects rather than define evil as an absolute thing that has to happen. So in other words, they look at it like if something is not having a bad effect, then it is neither good nor evil. It can only be considered good or evil if the effect of that something is bad, is evil or good. I think my 15 minutes of fame is over for now. Thanks.
Okay, I guess it's time for me to start. All right, guys. So I'm Charles, and I will be talking about the problem of evil and suffering in ancient and present-day Africa in light of African traditional religion. And I have so much to say, so let me just continue. So I just want to start with a few pictures here. So I guess this was what I was thinking about ancient Africa in terms of, you might not even know what these are. So I guess maybe you know the pyramids. This is Aksum, I believe. This is ancient Zimbabwe. These are the Dahomey female warriors. This is Ado from Zanzibar. This is Aksum, I believe. And this, I believe, is it Somalia or something? So like there was a lot of stuff going on in Africa, such that Africa was not always just, you know, the so-called dark continent. Like there's been stuff going on in Africa for a minute. So this is just, I just found this online, one of the first places to be airstriked in African history in Somalia. And so I think this is more of a subject of research inquiry, in the sense of, like, I was wondering whether there's stuff that happened historically in Africa that has led to more suffering currently, as opposed to initially, although there has always been suffering all over the world. And then I've come to present day Africa now. Now, present day Africa, and I'll also comment on the image below, but here we see the recent skirmishes in Sudan and Mackenzie, I guess for the Kenyan audience, and the deaths that have been ongoing. And so like, this seems to be the face of Africa for the most part, although we also know that the West has its own evil and suffering, as we know with the Russia and Ukraine story that is ongoing. And so, but then again, I think before I start even delving into the African traditional religion and how it views these issues, I wanted to also say that there are those who might probably join and are not Africans or are not familiar with Africa well, and they don't know that this is also Africa. These two are Africa, but then this is also Africa. So this is Nairobi, this is Lagos, this is Cape Town, and this is, no, this is Lagos, this is Cairo, this is Cape Town, this is Nairobi. So like, as much as there is suffering in Africa, there's also this. And so like, I think it's important for us to have a more macro perspective on what Africa is. It's not just evil and suffering 24/7. At least we who live in Africa know this, but others might not even know this. They might think this is somewhere in the West. And then this is actually Kinshasa, as much as we know DRC to be, just craziness 24/7. So that is just for starters. But now let's get into the African traditional religion. So like I started with a research paper by a guy in Maseno University, and he was trying to investigate sin and evil in African cosmology, and was trying to contrast it with the Abrahamic religions. And so like that's John Mbiti there. He's a famous Christian philosopher who passed away. And so he commented about some of the things that Ssemakula has said about there's a tribe called the Vugusu. And they say that there's an evil divinity which God created good and then later turned away, which is interesting. That there was Lucifer who was created and later became evil. So like it seems, I don't know if this is a recollection, and if you guys are familiar with Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. So as far as the Bible is concerned, all humanity was at one place at one point. So it's not surprising that there would be similarities, even as Ssemakula realized, amongst different communities, because from the Christian perspective, all humanity were once at one place. So it's not strange to find that there are some ancient African communities that believed that there was an evil divinity that was created, although we believe that Satan was created good, but that's not even the point. The point is to see that there's this idea of God, spirits being the origin of evil. And then people in a community, like we Africans are familiar with the idea that, oh, maybe it's your cousin who cursed you. That's why you can't get a job, So, so there's that concept. And then there's also the concept of we are not individualistic like the West. Like there's always that idea of community life as opposed to individualism. And so like whatever I do in the privacy of my own home can affect maybe my whole extended family as far as Africa is concerned. So there's that aspect as opposed to maybe what Westerners have imbibed in us that, it's all about you, individual responsibility, it's all about you. And also like there's the issue of, disregarding the ancestral spirits, which has also been commented on. And that is now the real sin in African community. Like, whoa, like if things are going wrong, you messed with the ancestors somewhere and you need to appease them. And then also the idea of how to deal with it. So like this the Sukuma. I'll just read this. I'm trying not to read too much. So because I have so much to say. In fact, I'll not read that. But the idea here is that there's the issue of we need to perform cleansing rituals and ceremonies officiated by ritual elders, medicine men, priests, or diviners. And so that's the way we'll alleviate evil and suffering. And I can imagine, especially right now, with all the suffering going on, that's how, especially in rural Africa, that's how you deal with problems, sacrifices, offerings, places that are held sacred. So there are people who go to a certain shrine somewhere and they offer a sacrifice or they perform something. So that's African religion. That's what we've learned. And so like, even as I just come to a close on that particular aspect, we see that there's this idea that there is a supreme being, and then there are the spirits, and then there are the ancestors. And so we need to ensure we are always in good terms with them, and then maybe we can ward off evil and suffering. Now, I wanted to look at the atheist perspective on evil and suffering, and I guess this is more general, but I think the topic of evil and suffering has probably, and I think maybe we can talk about this in the cross-examination, has led to some Africans entertaining atheism in an age where probably in the last couple of decades, atheism was not a thing, but now it's a thing because like the issue of evil and suffering has made many millennial and Gen Z Africans, and also non-millennial and Gen Z Africans, think about atheism and how it can help them make sense of the perpetual evil and suffering that seems to be in Africa. So like I was looking at, so the Skeptic magazine is by a guy called Michael Sharma. And so there's this guy called Ken Levy who wrote an article and was trying to give a renewed defense of atheism in light of suffering. And so he has this syllogism. And so And so I don't know if the syllogism is good enough, but pretty much it says that if God were omnibenevolent, he would want to minimize evils like violence, pain, suffering, and premature death. And then he says also, if God were omniscient, he would know everything that is happening in the universe. And if God were omnipotent, he would be able to act on his omnibenevolence and omniscience to prevent most or all evil from occurring. Yet all of this evil still occurs. And then therefore God, an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent being probably does not exist. So some atheists would hold to that. And maybe I'll comment later on that there are atheists who are retracting from this, but that's later on. And then if a higher intelligence exists at all, it probably lacks at least one of these three qualities. So this was an article in this particular magazine. And so he was trying to pretty much give the argument that he doesn't find any arguments from Christians that help him assuage him with his problems with evil and suffering. And so he feels, because he can't see heaven, so that means he feels heaven would have been the best answer, but the particular author, who's an atheist, feels that there's no heaven. And so he feels that this is a defeater for Christianity, and hence people should become atheists and embrace naturalism. The perspective that nature is all that exists. So Charles, I am a Christian, and I want to give a Christian perspective on these issues that I've just addressed thus far. And so like I was going by an essay by Greg Weltier, who was writing on the problem of evil. And so I'm hoping I'll be able to go in depth as I wanted to, because there are a lot of issues I wanted to go to. And so there are two aspects of Christian theology called theodicy and inscrutability. So theodicy is the idea that God may have a good reason for allowing the evil he does allow. So that's what theodicy is. That's a branch of theology that deals with that. And then the fact that unbelievers may not be able to discern or correctly guess at the justifying reason for allowing evil is no good reason to think he doesn't have a reason. And we'll comment on that a bit later. So the showing God's reasons for permitting evil is theodicy, and God having a good reason for permitting evil, or arguing that the second premise, so that God doesn't have good reasons, cannot be proven. So that's inscrutability. So one is unable to actually prove that God doesn't have a good reason. So, but I'll try and see if I can make it make more sense. So theodicy is from the Greek word theos. So theos is God, and dikaios is just. And so a justification of what God is doing with men. So that's what theodicy is. So, so this guy tried to rehash that argument that we just saw earlier. A perfectly powerful being can prevent any evil. A perfectly good being will prevent evil as far as he can. God is perfectly powerful and good. So if a perfectly powerful and good God exists, there will be no evil. There is evil. And we've seen evil. We've seen even in my slides, Sudan, Mackenzie, Ukraine. Therefore, God doesn't exist. So he's trying to now see, does this really follow? So we should question the second premise. Let's remember, what's the second premise? A perfectly good being will prevent evil as far as he can. That a perfectly good God must prevent all evil. For it doesn't necessarily follow from God's perfect goodness that he will prevent evil, every evil he can prevent. So first of all, we want to start with theodicies that don't have a biblical basis, that are common amongst Christians. Because one of the reasons I'm going in depth in this is because I see a lot of memes by both Christians and atheists online, and they grieve me. So like I just wanted to go through a few things to just sort some issues out. So there's the free will theodicy that because we have to have free will, so moral evil has to exist. So like, I can't be forced by God to love me. But the free will argument, if free will is so valuable, then why doesn't God have it? And why don't we have it in heaven? Because in heaven, it's more of a compatibilistic free will. And I think I'm going a bit out of topic, but it's not necessarily the libertarian free will, which is you can do whatever you want, however you want. And then there's the natural law theodicy. That's also said that, natural evil is due to the laws of nature. But now, even from a biblical perspective, if a stable environment requires the possibility of natural evil by requiring laws of nature, then why isn't there any natural evil in the pre-fall Garden of Eden or in the new heavens and new earth? So it doesn't necessarily follow. So those ones are common amongst Christians, but they don't we don't necessarily have to use them. Huh? So I see my time is going, so I'll just go quickly. Yeah? So the ones that have a biblical basis are the one of punishment, and which was actually commented on by Ssemakula, whereby Adam and Eve were punished. And so we have the world the way it is. There's the soul building theodicy, whereby suffering can bring about good character. You know, I'm even thinking if you go to the gym, you're going to suffer, but that suffering is good for you. So not all suffering is bad. And I hope we can at least agree on that. Then there's the pain as God's megaphone. So this, number 3, comes from a guy called C.S. Lewis, and we can talk about it later, but he's the one who said, pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. So that's, he's a former atheist who became a Christian. He said that he actually wrote a book on that. The problem of pain. And then number 4, the higher order goods theodicy, that some goods can't exist apart from the evils to which they are responsible, for instance. So I will not go, maybe if someone wants to ask a question, they can ask. I don't want to read those particular passages. And so there is the greater good theodicy, whereby we have Job. We all know the story of Job, whereby we saw that in the end, God restored to him things. We have Joseph, whereby he would not have been able to become a prime minister if he didn't go through all that he did, and he saved Egypt. And Jesus, he suffered so that we can get eternal redemption, the greater good theodicy. And then there's still, it can be limited because there are narratives in the Bible that don't necessarily give a very simple way of looking at it. And I think I'm going a bit quickly on it, but like the example of Job, Joseph, and Jesus are some of the best examples, but we don't get those examples that easily in scripture. And so I just wanted also to focus quickly on the issue of God's sovereignty. And sovereignty means that God is in complete control of everything, like natural evil, whether it's earthquakes, whether it's the Mackenzie, or whether it's Sudan, that he's completely in control. And so in terms of inscrutability, I said that we'll come back to this, and I can see that my time is pretty much up, that one needs to establish, he who affirms that there is no reason why God can allow, like, for example, the Mackenzie issue, must prove that the question in the problem of evil is not whether Christians know enough to rule in the applicability of a theodicy on any particular occasion, but whether critics know enough to rule out their applicability. And there's a biblical argument for that divine inscrutability. I'll not go to it. Romans 9-11 talks about how Israel is still going to be used despite the fact that they've rejected the Messiah. I'm just going quickly on that. So there's the issue of, and I think maybe we need to talk about this because I think this is the biggest issue. The real reason why people have a problem with the problem of evil is emotionally. Even if you give them all these theodicy inscrutability arguments, people are suffering. Right now, with the Mackenzie issue, people have lost loved ones. In Sudan, people are just dying and nobody cares. In Ukraine, we don't even know what's going to happen. So the issue is more emotional. And I think here, I just wanted to say that there needs to be a listening ear. And I think that's the main thing I wanted to say. And I think I loved what here Mary Jo Sharp, I guess she's not that well known to people, but what she says, it may seem odd to suggest that one studies apologetics as a means of preparing to work through pain, but that is exactly what I suggest. So apologetics is actually giving a defense for the hope that one has. So though we can never really be 100% ready for the emotional impact suffering brings into our lives, at least we can become familiar with and perhaps even find a conclusion to the argument from evil before a devastating blow strikes our lives. And so this is, I guess, more for the Christian, but we would invite you also the atheist and the African traditional practitioner to it, that when they have these good arguments of theodicy and inscrutability, when real evil comes to their lives, they'll be able to deal with it. And maybe I'll comment on this later, that the depth of the riches of God. And here, the cognitive limitations that we have to understanding why God would allow something is the same way in the medieval period, people would think we were crazy if we started talking to them about quantum mechanics and how light can be both a wave and a particle. They would say that we are insane, but right now we know that is the fact. So the fact that we have cognitive limitations is a fact. That's why the inscrutability argument comes in. And I just want to end. Sorry, I've gone 2 minutes past my time, I think. But probably the main part that I want to focus in is that the God that the Christians believe in suffered. And so he knows what it means to suffer, like with the Mackenzie issue, like in Sudan, like in Ukraine. And so he himself becomes a man, lives the perfect life we can't live, and then dies the death we deserve, such that those who put their trust in him, their sins get transferred to him, and then his perfection gets transferred to them, such that they can have peace with God and peace with their fellow man and get transformed to become like God as they await for God to come and renew everything. I know I've gone through that very quickly, but hopefully maybe as we continue, we shall clarify some few issues. Sorry for taking too long.
Thank you, Ssemakula and Charles, for your opening statements, which were rich with a lot of information on evil and suffering in the context of Christian, atheist, and African traditional views. So right now we are going to go to a session of cross-examination. So Charles will start cross-examining Ssemakula for the next 5 minutes, and then the tables will turn. Ssemakula will cross-examine Charles for the next 5 minutes. And then to save on time, you'll immediately transition to rebuttals. And your rebuttals are going to be 10 minutes each, starting with Ssemakula, then Charles. Thereafter, after that, then you're going to start our Q&A. So over to you, Charles, to cross-examine Ssemakula. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to ask Ssemakula, are you familiar with the theodicies that Christian theologians have given that deal with the problem of evil and suffering?
Yes, I am.
Is there any that you find is most pathetic or one that is best?
Unfortunately, most of them don't really answer the question of why there is evil and suffering. What they do is excuse why there is evil and suffering, which is a completely different viewpoint in my view.
And you said that there's no actual definition of evil or naturalism, as it only depends on what the effects are. And so, like, I was just wondering, since we can't really define evil or naturalism, is there really a problem of evil?
The problem of evil is a problem which involves having a belief in an omnipresent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God. In real life, evil is simply what creates harm to a specific entity, and good is probably what creates benevolent actions to a specific entity. So in the sense of absolute evil or absolute good, such terms don't exist. Every act simply is. However, the entity that lives through that act is what finally defines it as whether it is evil or good. So from a naturalist point of view, you can't blame the act or people behind it, but depending on your point of view and how it affects you, it becomes evil or good.
And I was just wondering, who gets to define which entity should be harmed and which one should not?
The entity that has the actions done upon it. And actually, it's 2 points of view: the entity that has the actions done upon it and the entity that is doing the actions. To give you an example, in the case of war, your enemy's God is what the enemy is considering its God leading it to victory. To you is the avenging devil, which is attacking you. Whereas your God leading you to victory, to the enemy, might be the avenging devil. So good and bad may be defined, the same act may be defined as both good and bad by different entities looking at it from a different viewpoint.
And so I guess I wanted to ask, what if this entity is a rat or a mosquito or a cockroach? Who gets to decide that we can kill? Because I actually love killing cockroaches, oh man. and killing mosquitoes and rats. Oh man, I just destroy them. But now that's even neither here nor there. But I was wondering who gets to decide that me doing that is okay, but for human beings, it's not okay. Where is the standard?
If you notice what I said at first, it depends upon the entity actually having the axe dying and the entity that is doing the act. When you kill a cockroach, to the cockroach, that is an evil act. To the human being, it is a good act because the cockroach has undesirable effects on the life of the human being. So from the point of view of the human being, that is a good act. But if you were the cockroach seeing this leg landing down on you, I don't think you can consider this entity a very good entity coming to kill you or your tribe.
So like, could we say then evil and suffering, there is no real problem of evil and suffering. It only depends on who is being asked.
There is evil and there is suffering. But what I disagree on is whether there is a problem of evil, the so-called conundrum of evil and suffering. Because as long as evil is not defined as based upon some entity outside the person who is experiencing it, then we don't have that problem.
Oh, I wanted to ask Kevin, I don't know if my 5 minutes are up because I'm just continuing.
I think Kevin is keeping
You
track.
have 20 seconds.
All right. Okay, then let me just ask, because I had so many other questions. Anyway, I'll deal with them on the rebuttal. But I wanted to ask, I hear, and I guess you didn't touch on it on this debate, but maybe you can touch on it. I hear so many people who are atheists saying that God should have acted this way in the Old Testament, or this Christian should have done this here. And I'm just wondering, like, what exact standard are they using, especially since you've spoken about something to do with subjectivity of evil in your talk. Yes. And so, and I'm assuming that means that the moral consensus for today was different from 1,000 years ago. And so if that is true, then on what basis are we using the moral consensus for today to judge God and Christians 1,000 years ago?
We're using the standards of today to decide whether they were evil or not. If you may notice, again, I'll go back to what I said. It is the entity that is doing, that is experiencing, or the entity that is doing, that actually has the moral judgment in this case. So from our point of view, regardless as to what the ancients may have thought of it, from our point of view, some of these acts are considered evil, but they are based upon our current morality and the way we feel about how things should be. From their point of view, maybe not. To give you an example, in the 1800s, there was nothing evil about owning slaves. But if you dared to suggest right now that we make some slaves extra here, I'm pretty sure the whole world will be up against you. We judge other people based upon us. I mean, it's normal. When you're, as a Christian, you will judge people based upon your Christian morality. As an atheist, if I have some morality, I will judge them. If I'm a Muslim, I will judge on them. So the right we have is the right we've given ourselves by being the current judges of morality.
I think it's your time to ask questions.
Yes, although you've sort of answered them by your questions when you were asking me on these things. Now I wanted to okay, first of all, one of them I want to make is a comment and your opinions on this. You mentioned the story of Job and you pointed out how it is such a good story because at the end of the day, Job got back. Was it sevenfold or something fold of what he had lost, right?
Yeah.
Now, my question is, when you speak about Job getting back sevenfold, his sons, his servants who died, are they not worth it? Does it actually make sense to have a God destroy your sons and servants so that later on you can get 10, 15 more sons and servants?
I guess I would say,
is that a moral act?
I would say, by which standard are we judging that act of God?
Even by the same standards that are exhibited in the Bible that you are talking about. If a human being, say, I came over to your family, destroyed, killed your wife, killed your children, then made you suffer a bit, then later on came back and gave you a new wife, and you got 3 times as many children and probably many more riches. Would you still consider me moral because after doing all this, I now improved your lot after all that suffering?
So, like from a biblical perspective, we would say that God enabled the story of Job to be an encouragement to thousands who have suffered and think about suffering, that they have something to look forward to. But on top of that, I would push back to the naturalist and ask them if human beings are just like meaningless molecules of motion, and I don't know if that's your position, then there was nothing wrong that happened to Job. So like on naturalism, there's really no standard to accuse God on.
It looks like you ignored everything else I said before. If you remember what I said is that the entity doing the judging, feeling it, is the entity that sets the standards. So in naturalism, when you say no standards, the mistake that a lot of Christians make is that they presume having no absolute standards standing on something outside an entity means that there are no standards at all. That is a wrong impression. What I'm looking at here is based upon the standards that you have, you as the entity, is whether you consider these acts as moral, irregardless as what you may imagine the naturalists would. In other words, if it wasn't God that did this, presuming you accept absolute morality. If you accept absolute morality, it means that an act is moral, whether or not an entity does it, whichever entity does it. And an act is immoral, whichever entity does it. So if you were to do a similar act today, would you consider it moral? And if you don't consider it moral, why would you consider God doing that very act moral? Or does the rule not apply to him?
This is where the inscrutability argument comes in. And I hope you looked at what I said. So the inscrutability argument deals with the premise 2 of that argument, which said that God has no sufficient reasons why he would allow that suffering. But now that is the burden of proof is on the one who is objecting to show that. And the reason I'm saying that, that's why we gave the example of, for example, Job, where we saw what came out. Joseph, the suffering built him to become a good leader. And so at the time of suffering, it was impossible for anyone to say that. I can see.
Let's stick to the Job story. I don't want to go around it because the Joseph story has a completely different outcome and affected Joseph, not the people around him. The question I'm asking, which is just one you seem to have avoided, is that if you did this now, let's presume you had the power, you Bill Gates, whoever, came, killed somebody's families, destroyed him, made him suffer, then you improved him tenfold times. Is that moral? And if you say it is not moral, why would you consider God doing it at that time?
I would say it is moral because God is the standard in himself. By definition, God is the standard.
So if Bill Gates did that to you right now, that is a moral act.
Oh, but now Bill Gates is not the standard.
No, but he's doing the same thing God did.
Oh no, but now Bill Gates doesn't have the inscrutability. Remember the inscrutability thing?
Regardless which, he's doing the same thing God did. My question is, given the information you have, given that you also don't know what Bill Gates is up to, given the information you have, why would you consider Bill Gates immoral and God not?
Remember the cognitive limitations argument I gave the presentation, and I gave the example of the medievals who could not even fathom quantum mechanics, despite the fact that it is a fact. And so the fact that at this moment, my cognitive faculties cannot understand why something is happening doesn't mean that there is a reason.
Exactly. So you don't know why Bill Gates is doing this, right? You don't know why God is doing it. So in both cases, you don't know.
Oh, but it's because of the different beings. Bill Gates is a human being, and the Bible says, "Cursed is anyone who puts their trust in man."
So what you are implying right now is that the rules are not obsolete.
No, they are because the
standard. If they are absolute, then they apply to both entities. The very term absolute implies that both entities are subject to the same rules.
I would say,
I'm not saying they are wrong or right. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it is wrong or it is right. No. I'm just pointing out that by saying this rule doesn't apply to Bill Gates, but it applies to God, you are immediately removing any claim that it's an absolute truth.
Okay. I see as if it's rebuttal time or something. Is that true,
Yeah,
Kevin?
I think we can now go to rebuttal on that note. So we're going to start with Ssemakula to do your rebuttal. So your 10 minutes starts now, the moment you start speaking. The moment you start speaking.
Okay. Now, I want to address some of these. I made some notes on some of these things. In the first place, let's start off by pointing out, as I said earlier on, that from my point of view, good and evil are viewed from the entity as opposed to an absolute thing outside the entity. However, given that, there has been a misconception that has been presented by a lot of Christian thoughts that somehow the fact that God does something somehow makes it absolute, but when man does it, it makes it relative. So first, I think it's a misconception of the terms absolute and relative. Secondly, I think it's an abrogation of the very whole idea of morality that we have. If you can assign an act to a being and subjectively decide whether it is moral or immoral based upon the level of that being in the hierarchy, then you have no grounds to sit back when the king decides to kill half the population. After all, he's higher than the rest. Or when the father decides to kill half of his family, after all, he's higher than the rest. Because the idea here seems to be that as long as you're in the higher hierarchy, the rules that apply to the lower hierarchy doesn't apply to you, which is what I was bringing up the idea of Job. If I, as a human being, did the same thing and had the power to improve his life after doing it, I would not be considered moral. But for some reason, if a God does it, it becomes moral because we really don't understand the reasons he did it, but you don't understand the reason I did it either. So it doesn't make sense, it doesn't support the argument of it being a moral act, absolute moral act, if it is relative to specific entities, in this case, a God. And then I'll ignore his theodicies that don't have any biblical basis because naturally it means that he probably doesn't believe in them. But I want to look at some of the theodicies that, some of the things that he brought up. Punishment theodicy is one. It is argued that suffering is a result of God's just punishment of evildoers. Yet this is a God we say is all powerful, all knowing, and thus, and also all benevolent. The reason why this doesn't make sense is because if he was only all powerful and all benevolent, it means he wouldn't know that somebody is going to be evil, and thus will have to react to the person's being evil after the fact. However, when you add on the idea of him being omniscient, which means that at any given moment, he already knows what I'm going to do, what I'm going to leave. In fact, the whole argument behind free will is thrown out of the book, because if somebody actually knows everything that is going to happen, then there's no such a thing as free will. It also means that at any given moment, this God knows X is going to be evil, Y is going to be evil, Z is going to be good, Mackenzie is going to kill all these people, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't make sense to start arguing, therefore, it's a result of God's just punishment of evildoers. Yet at the beginning of the creation, presuming there's a creation, he already knew there's evils that are going to happen. He already knew Satan was going to tempt Eve. He already knew Eve was going to fall for the temptation. He already knew Eve is going to tempt Adam, who will fall for it. So that means that right at the beginning, he already had the means to prevent any of these things happening. By them happening, it implies either he's not benevolent, in the sense that he lets all this suffering happen even if he knows it is going to happen based upon this, or he's not all-powerful, he cannot have stopped them even if he had wanted to, or maybe he's not all omniscient in the sense that he didn't even know this. But remember that in the first place, as long as you argue on the basis of God being omniscient, you immediately remove the concept of free will. And you immediately remove any reasons for that God having to punish evildoers, yet he could have stopped the evildoing right at the beginning. And I'm not speaking of God seeing something happening and at the point of creation, presuming there was such an event, he knew everything that was going to happen. So he could have arranged things not to. As long as you presume the omnibenevolent, omniscient, and omnipowerful. That is the basic argument that we speak of when we are speaking about a perfectly powerful being. So maybe a lot of Christians don't look at it that way, but we cannot present such a creature and have suffering at the same time. That does not, by the way, before anybody comes up with the idea, that does not mean that it somehow disproves the existence of gods in general. It disproves the specific existence of an omnibenevolent, omniscient, and omnipowerful God. Specifically that God. It doesn't mean that there's no God who could have created the world and watches it and then tries to intervene and stop things happening. It doesn't mean that it could have had a God who is all powerful and yes, can prevent things, but refuses to do it for whatever reasons he does. It doesn't stop all those. But as long as you have all three elements, then right from the beginning, none of this needs to have happened. Unless we presume that what we consider evil may actually not be evil in God's sight. In which case, from the human point of view, we no longer have an omnibenevolent God. Almost everything else he's argued on this is based upon trying to refute our statements on that. So in most cases, I actually copied a lot of them. In most cases, I will ignore. Do I still have a few minutes? Kevin, do I still have a few minutes?
You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you. So what I propose here is one of two things. Either there are no gods and things just happen. So we decide whether they are good or bad. We decide whether this is evil or is good. And in other words, the morality that we live is what defines how we look at the world and how we present the world. Or they are gods, but the gods are evil. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin, I presume I just continue.
Yes, please do.
All right. Okay, I have a lot to say. Hopefully, I will be able to be clear. So I just want to start with my presentation before I go to what has transpired in the cross-examination and the rebuttals. So as you've looked at my presentation, I think on the issue of African traditional religion, we were mostly in agreement on like how African traditional religion viewed evil and suffering, its origin, its solutions, and things of that nature. And so when I looked at one atheist perspective on this, I guess I feel like Ssemakula has like some sort of affinity towards his position, kind of. And I just want to touch that on a touch on that a bit. But before I touch on that, I just want to say that I gave some theodicies, and not all of them were touched on. So in fact, the issue of inscrutability, whereby that second premise, trying to prove that there are no sufficient reasons, that has not really been touched on. So the issue of inscrutability, maybe it can be touched on, or maybe if someone asks a question. But we also had the pain as God's megaphone theodicy that was not touched on, the soul building theodicy. So the punishment theodicy was kind of touched on, and I just want to look at that in a bit.
I think what you're looking at is that they are all the same thing. So that's why I didn't touch on them, but go on.
Oh, okay. And then there was the issue of Job, which I want to get to in a bit. So there's also the issue of how we didn't look at the whole idea of, in fact, I was interested in knowing how atheists deal with the emotional problem of evil. Because especially, and so like on naturalism, we are just accidents of the universe, and life is ultimately meaningless.
No.
And when we die, it won't even matter whether we existed. Well, life is, although actually this is not, although we could engage, but it's rebuttal time.
That's why I've kept quiet.
Oh yeah. But like maybe in a Q&A, during the Q&A or final statements, you can explain to me how on naturalism we are not accidents of the universe, how life is not ultimately meaningless, and how when we die, it won't even matter whether we discussed evil and suffering when everyone dies. So like in that perspective, if that's the naturalistic, if that's the consistent naturalist's perspective, i.e. nihilism, then how does the atheist deal with the emotional problem of evil? Because it's real talk. So maybe we can touch on that at some point, because it's real. As much as I actually believe atheism is a delusion, by the way, and naturalism is a delusion, but I feel for the naturalist and the atheist who has to deal with evil and actually has to deal with life, with their worldview. So those issues were not touched on. So, but now let me now get to the cross-examination and the rebuttals. I see I probably have taken 4 minutes, I think. So the issue that probably evil gods exists. This assumes that there is a standard by which we can call things evil and good. And so if it is our society today, because 300 years ago, a society would have had different values. And so if these values keep changing with every millennia, every century, then what is good, what is, because in the year 3000, we might probably think, I don't know, bestiality is okay, who knows? And so if that's what's going to happen, then on what basis is anything evil and good if God does not exist? And so there is no evil God or good God if God does not exist, because we need that standard. And there was this idea that probably God does not exist. But now what I would say that it is impossible for God not to exist. And this is why I say this. The reason why I say it's impossible for him not to exist is because, guess what? We have a universe that on naturalism, we cannot explain why we have it. And we actually have meaningful human beings called Charles Wandalo and Ssemakula engaging one another as personal beings, and their souls, and they are engaging one another personally. On naturalism, we have this problem called the hard problem of consciousness. That is actually a debate amongst atheist philosophers. And I could go on and on. And so if God doesn't exist, then our reality is not true. Naturalism cannot explain to us why the world is the way it is right now. So that's why I say it is impossible for God not to exist. God has to exist to explain why our reality is the way it is. And so I want to name drop a guy called Graham Opie. Graham Opie is an atheist from Australia. And I know I shouldn't be bringing in new stuff in the rebuttal, so sorry for that. But maybe it can be addressed maybe in the final statement. Graham Opie is among atheist philosophers who actually do academic work. And the definition they have of atheism is the belief there is no God. That's what is used in Stanford, in Cambridge. And so that definition. So as atheist philosophers in academia are concerned, they say that we need a case for naturalism to be made for atheism to be true. And so, since we have not been given a case for naturalism, maybe it can be made another day or another time. Then there's no reason to take the position of naturalism true. And we have very many good reasons to take the Christian position to be true. List of which is not, we have the universe, we have the historical Jesus who is attested by both ancient and present day skeptical and believing historians. And we have an empty tomb that is also attested. So we have various issues we need to look at. So we have a case for Christianity, zero case for naturalism. In fact, that itself should be enough to deal with the problem of evil. Oh, I have 3 minutes left. And I have like a million things to talk about. There was this issue of creation. And so I think the cosmic micro background has shown us that there was a time when time did not exist. Oh man, there was a time, I know that's a conundrum, but there was a beginning of time, space, and matter. Meaning, time, space, and matter were created. And guess what? That is proof that there was a creation. And so we know for a fact that there was a creation. And since that means it needs a timeless, spaceless, and matterless start. And that is who we call God. Actually, yeah. So we'll move to that and go now to the free will issue. Because in fact, that was one of the biblical and non-biblical theodicies I put up, the free will. So I probably agree with you to some extent. The only problem is there's a bigger problem on naturalism with free will. Because on naturalism, we have guys like, what's his name? Maybe even Ssemakula can remind me. I've forgotten his name for now, but even some atheists are coming to see that there is no basis for free will on atheism. And precisely for the reasons that I've given, on naturalism, life is ultimately meaningless, and we are accidents of a universe. And so where free will comes from is intertwined with the hard problem of consciousness, which is a huge problem on naturalism, very huge problem, despite the fact that there's a concept called emergentism that has been brought about to kind of like try to wade around that, but it's still an issue. So the issue of free will is actually a problem for the atheist, not for the Christian. Because on the Christian worldview, we have 4 issues. We have something called Reformed theology. We have something called provisionism, Arminianism. I won't go through them because this would be a subject of another debate. Molinism, etc. And these have tried to look at the issues of how free will is compatible with God's sovereignty. We've actually done the work historically for the past 2,000 years. On naturalism, we haven't even begun to talk about how free will is compatible with God not existing, and on top of the hard problem of consciousness. So I think these are issues that we need to talk about, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. And so when you come to the issue of Job, which I think was probably the biggest issue that we're talking about, and I'm trying to look at the time, because I'm saying a lot and I'm not looking at the time. I think my time is up. Most likely my time is up, right, Kevin?
20 seconds, unless you can say something in that 20 seconds.
Okay, so I guess what I could say is, I know maybe I've said a lot there, and I'm hoping maybe in the Q&A, maybe people can ask questions in that regard. I've seen some questions in the live stream, but what I would just say is, if God does not exist, there is no problem of evil, because we need a standard to determine what is evil and what is not evil. And on naturalism, we just have ultimate meaninglessness. And to some extent, I could say the debate is over on that point, because on naturalism, we have ultimate meaninglessness. But let's see what comes from this.
Right. So let me share first of all.
Kevin, before you share,
Yes.
can I comment something? This rebuttal has actually brought whole complete new things that we hadn't worked on right from the beginning.
Yeah, and
we
I
are
think
not in the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I think we've completely moved away from
Yeah.
what we presented initially, which
Yeah, I
brings
think-
the problem. So how do we address this while maintaining what we worked with at the beginning?
Mhm.
I think to be the adjudicator in this, we'll stick with what was presented. So anything that was presented anew in the rebuttal will not be considered either in the Q&A or maybe in your exchanges. I think for us to ensure that there's consistency in terms of also what has been asked, the questions that have already been asked. So if there's anything new, that would make the debate have a perspective which we wouldn't want right now, considering we are at the tail end. I hope that is fine with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll start with the questions. So for those who are joining us via Zoom, you're free to maybe raise your hand. You can use the raise hand feature if you want to use that, or you can post it in the chat. So we'll start with the questions that were shared in the live stream via the Ssemakula Hangout. And I can see there's also an exchange between him or her and Branad, but I'll start with Ssemakula to you. I think this one was to you. Are you sure that Christianity, or maybe even just both of you, are you sure Christianity is monotheistic? So I think we can answer them one by one, then we can, as we move on. What do you think?
I'll be honest. Charles will probably come up with the idea that Christians only believe in one God, and you'll come up with some mumbo jumbo of how the three become one and whatever. The thing is, from outside looking in, it doesn't really appear to make sense to most of us that you can call God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit one person, and yet you still consider them different, and each of them acting independently, having different stuff. So, to be honest, yes, I would have the same reservations of the Pascal, wondering whether Christianity truly is monotheistic. But I'm sure Charles has some word salad which will sort of resolve this.
So Charles,
So I would just comment
very briefly.
Yeah. So one God in three persons is one what and three whose. That's all I would say. Deuteronomy 6 says there's one God. Matthew 28 says, Jesus said we baptize in the name of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we can talk about the intricacies of what that means. But let me be short and sweet because there are too many questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So let's go to the other question. So the other question is, I think this was first of all a comment. Ssemakula Hangout was saying, suffering cannot be a punishment from God, since the Bible is clear, He created evil. I'll combine it to the next statement, then Charles, maybe you can make a comment on that. Evil is God's way of getting unbelievers' attention. I think that was from Charles. That would make sense if he says that would make sense if evil only happens to the unbelievers. Can't an all-powerful God have a better way of getting our attention? Charles?
Yes, I want to answer on that. What I would say is I want to know what standard he is using to judge God by which he should be judged. Remembering that we've kind of agreed on naturalism, there is no standard that we should judge people on. Like it just depends on which society we are living. And so if there is no standard by which we should judge God, the question itself is flawed if naturalism is true. But
Charles, can we get rid of this misconception once and for all? When you say there is no standard which you can judge, yet you are saying since it is based upon the society. If it is based upon the society, then that is a standard. You cannot, on one hand, claim there is no standard, on the other hand, say it is based upon the society. Make up your mind. Maybe what you're saying, there is no standard outside that society which you can judge it on. Then we would agree. But you cannot one side say there is no standard, and then on the same hand say the standard is based upon the society. That is a standard.
Oh, I actually think you misunderstood me. What I meant is that the community has no standard. I also
believe that you're making a mistake. Understand? If you're saying the community has no standard outside the community, which comes from outside it, again, I will agree with you. But within that community, they have their standards. Isn't that a standard?
Oh, Kevin, should I have a follow-up? Because I can have a follow-up, but it would derail the Q&A.
Maybe one more, then we can go to the other question. I can see you already have 9 minutes for the Q&A left, and you have questions. Yeah, maybe one more, because you've been asked.
Okay, what I would say is God is under no obligation to take seriously the community standards, especially if life is ultimately meaningless. And I leave it at that.
Okay. I will leave it at that, Ssemakula, then you can. you maybe in your closing statement.
Can you give me 30 seconds on that?
Maybe let me give 10 or 15 to be 15
seconds. I'll live with that. Charles, your assumption is that as long as there is no God, the standards are not valid. Our assumption on naturalism is that as long as there are entities, those entities' standards are valid. We will beg to differ, but we will not beg to differ. We will still not agree with you that an entity having standards means it does not have standards. And for the moment, I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, as you said, we will go for others.
So there's this question by Secular Hangout is saying, Wandalo says there can be no evil if God does not exist. One, how can a God be the measure of evil, yet he is exempt from the same evil? Like he can kill and that's not evil, but I kill and it's evil. Maybe we can start with that.
In fact, I think it's in the previous debate where Kevin gave an example of how cops killing people involved with, who's this guy? With Mackenzie here in Kenya, like that would be good. And so we know that there are examples of, we have examples of situations where we can have killing being okay, but just to go to the essence of the question, what we would say is that God by definition is good. By definition, God is good. And so anything that is not like God is evil. But when we do not have the objective standard, by the way, the moral argument for God is that if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties exist. But objective moral values and duties do not exist. But we know objective moral values and duties exist because we've agreed here, murder is wrong in all society. Therefore, God exists. So actually, the existence of evil is an argument for the existence of God. So the Secular Hangout has helped us make a case for God's existence.
Again, I'll proceed to disagree with the statement of objective. The objective evil exists because we've agreed it exists. By a very matter of saying that we agree, it means that we are making the decisions ourselves subjective. The, objective evil, for anything to be objective, it applies to every single entity, irregardless as to its status. If I drop a person from a wall, from the top of a 10-story building, I drop a brick from the top of the 10-story building, I drop an elephant from the top of the 10-story building, I will not have different rules for all. That is an objective standard. However, if you tell me that the standard only works when it's this entity as opposed to the other entity, you have immediately removed the whole idea behind objective standard, which is what he's asking all. If God kills and you consider it correct, then on what basis can you even go ahead to claim that there is an objective good or an objective evil? In fact, The very fact that God can do things and get away with them that a human being is not allowed to do in itself implies that the very standards are capricious and dependent upon the whim of God. So if God woke up today and said homosexuality is good, bam, all you guys go, homosexuality is good. If God woke up today and said, you can kill everybody else who doesn't look like you, bam, it becomes good. You have immediately removed the whole basis of having something objective by making a statement. If it's objective, then it applies to God and it applies to man and it applies to everything else. Animal, cockroach, lion, blah, blah. And that is where we have a problem.
Okay, we are going on well. Let me go to the other question. I think this goes to Charles. What about when God give evil instructions like slavery, kill innocent Egyptian kids, etc.? So, what's your thoughts on that?
Is that the same as the previous question, more or less?
I think it's a part B of the same question. But I think you have addressed it, right?
More or less that's what we've talked about also.
Yeah. So I think we can go to, so there's a comment, I think it says God is under no obligation, so are we. That is the comment by Secular Hangout. So Bran is asking to Charles, any opinion on Isaiah 45:7 as pointed out by Secular Hangout?
Oh yeah, so Isaiah 55:7, where it says God creates calamity. So there are Hebrew texts that says it's calamity, and he's the one who does all these things. It's in line with the idea of God being sovereign and being in complete control of everything, and that he works everything for his purposes. So like I'll actually link this with Genesis 50:19-21, whereby Joseph says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good in order to bring about a certain result, to preserve many people alive. Remember the greater good theodicy that we're talking about? So that greater good theodicy is the one that is in view here, whereby God can be able to create what is looking like a calamity in order to bring something good. But still he is the standard by which something is called good or evil. I hope that is kind of clear.
I don't know which of these fallacies to play around with. First of all, the definition of, in this case, I presume we are talking about the Christian God. Let's stick to one kind of God. The definition of the Christian God, if you remember, is omnipotent, omnipotent, omniscient. It's difficult to convince me that the greater good means you destroy several different entities when you have the power to save all entities. The concept of greater good is a human concept because we don't have the powers to do everything proper. We have to allow some evil so we can allow a better good. Our lack of omnipotency, so to say, is what makes us in that manner. However, if we've made the assumption that God is omnipotent, then God has no restriction. If he wanted to save every single person in that place, he will do it. He has none of that thing. So really, I don't know why it sounds either we are claiming God is not omnipotent, in which case he's incapable and has to work for the greater good, or we are claiming God is not omnibenevolent, so he's doing things because that is what he wants to do and he really doesn't care what other entities are hurt in the process. But if we presume the gods that we Christians presume, then there is no such a creature as greater good. And then the second thing is, when you say that God by very definition is a definition of good, you've really removed good away from objective into a subjective thing. To give an example, when we say this particular length is a meter, we are basing it on a specific subjective length. So it is not an absolute measurement. when you put God as, by definition, good, immediately you've undermined your whole argument about the objective good and objective evil. In fact, you've probably thrown out of the window anything about the objective morality, because immediately you're saying everything is subjective to God.
Okay. It seems Kevin has had to step a bit. Oh, or he's still here. Okay.
You see, yeah?
Sorry, I was putting my laptop on charge. So yes, I think we are going on well. So let me just get to, and I think that is where we are with regards. Even our time is up for the Q&A. My timer just rang, but I'll give this final part of the opportunity to anyone who is on the Zoom to maybe come off mute or come on video and ask a question to Ssemakula or Charles regarding the debate for today. So if there's anyone here who is having any question, you can feel free to unmute and ask your question to Charles and Ssemakula as we get to the final. Yes, Maurice, over to you. You can unmute and ask your question or get on video. That is.
Thank you very much. I have already asked the question there on what do you call it, on YouTube. It's to Wandalo. How do you explain under what you have presented for what you call the Odyssey, like principles, under which God can be exempted from evil? So when evil happens to, or when God allow evil to happen to an innocent person, like let's say a young kid getting leukemia, and what the Odyssey does that for? Like, how would you clarify? How would you explain that? Why is God allowing that to happen? Because the other one you can claim maybe are people being punished for their evil, but now we have people here who have not attained, like, let's say, a level of understanding, discerning evil, good and evil. So when evil happened to them, what would be the explanation for God allowing such thing to happen to the innocent?
I think I would say three things. First, I would weep with the person who is dealing with that kind of child who is suffering. There's a verse which says, weep with those who weep. That's the first thing I would do. I would not be too quick to start saying, oh, this is why God is doing this, because this is a real issue. It's probably happening to someone right now. Secondly, I would say that we have a God who is intimately acquainted with suffering to the extent that he was sweating blood at the Garden of Gethsemane. Part of the reason why I can trust this God, because I even go through suffering. But then thirdly, we live in a foreign world, in a fallen world, and which has been affected by sin. I guess when Adam and Eve sinned, the whole world was affected. And so the hope that now the Christian brings is that there's the new Jerusalem and the new earth that is coming that will restore all things. But now, what I would say to my atheist friend is, if life is ultimately meaningless, and when that kid dies, it won't even matter whether it existed, we have a real problem, because we don't even really have evil suffering. Because in fact, it is Richard Dawkins who said, there is neither wrong nor right, DNA just is, and we just dance to its music. Richard Dawkins said that. And honestly, that's not what I want to tell the mom who has a kid who's suffering. So like, I think the Christian position helps us. I don't know what Ssemakula would want to say.
I'm still at loss as how we've gone through 1.5 hours of talk and you've completely ignored everything else we have said. For some reason, you come up with this thing, there's no ultimate meaning. I mean, I don't want to go into another debate, which is completely off the topic, but think about what is meaning. Who defines meaning? We, the human beings, define meaning. We, the entity, defines meaning. And if there's any meaning, it is meaning we have to find. That is the ultimate. So to wake up and say the child dying, there is no ultimate meaning. There is meaning to somebody somewhere in the human being, which might even become meaning to the rest of the world. The legend of Troy, It's a love story gone wrong. If it was no ultimate meaning, that story would have died out years ago. The whole stories of Jesus mattered to somebody. They were made meaning to somebody and came up. If you look at the human history, at the end of the day, we choose what it means to us. Some things will happen and we'll die out without meaning. Some things will come in and will have meaning. So this idea that the naturalist thing has no ultimate meaning, I honestly don't see where you get this thing from. If what you mean is that ultimate meaning has to come outside the entity, I don't even see why we need meaning if it has to come outside the entity. So what's the ultimate meaning of the dog? Does it come from the human being? What is the ultimate meaning of the cockroach? Do we have to go outside the cockroach to know the meaning the cockroach would assign to its life? Meaning is a concept decided by the entity that decides it. So let's get away from that fallacy of there's no something like ultimate meaning for the natural point of view.
Okay, on that note, I'll give 2 minutes each to you, to both of you, to make your final statements, and then we can get to wrap up of the debate. So we'll go first with who wants to go first? Charles.
Yeah, I guess I could go.
I have gone first every other time, so
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, so 2 minutes. Well, okay, what I want to say, maybe just to summarize what I presented the African traditional position whereby evil is thought of being out of line with the ancestors, spirits, and the community. And so the more you are at balance with them, the better things will be. So that's the solution for the African traditional religion, which I wouldn't hold to. And then I looked at the atheist position, and honestly, I don't see atheism being any indistinguishable to naturalism, as atheists like Graham Hoppe have seen, to the extent that they have tried to make a case for naturalism. I would really want an atheist to show me how naturalism does not lead to nihilism consistently. I really would, and I'm not even trying to be trite about this. Like, I really want to see peer-reviewed papers that have been done to show naturalism does not lead to nihilism. And nihilism, for those who might not know what that is ultimate meaninglessness. Because that's what the research is showing. And then I've shown the Christian position where we have theodicies. Theodicies is showing why God has good reasons for allowing evil. And then the inscrutability is where it shows that it is impossible to prove that God doesn't have sufficiently good reasons because of our limited cognitive capacity. And we gave the idea of how quantum mechanics could not be understood by medieval guys, but it was still a reality. Or I have a nephew, he cannot understand how to use Laplace transforms to solve ordinary differential equations, but that doesn't mean that ordinary differential equations are not a thing, they can be explained. So our limited cognitive capacities do not invalidate the theories. And I think my time is up.
All right, I will start from the back and go back to the front. In the first place, Charles has made a very good case about pointing out how it is impossible to prove God's reasons. But in the same breath, it means that it's impossible even to prove that God has good reasons or evil reasons. For all we know, God might have an evil reason to destroy life or to create calamities. By immediately saying it's impossible to prove God's reasons, you're also implying that it's impossible to decide whether God is good or bad because it's beyond our understanding. And on that one, I'll agree with you. Second thing is naturalism does not lead to nihilism. Nihilism implies that there is no meaning in anything. The only way this can make sense to, probably that's why Christians look at it, is that a lot of people think meaning has to come from outside the entities. And they believe that if there is no meaning within, from outside the entities, then there is no meaning at all. Atheism, most forms of atheism, not all, atheism is as wide as most other schools of thought. A lot of forms of atheism, humanism for one, believe that meaning comes from the individual and the society the individual is in. And this meaning is as important as any other meaning could be. With that meaning, it doesn't lead to nihilism, because you will never say life has no meaning. The last thing is, a lot of this debate has degenerated into trying to defend God by saying we do not understand God, or we have to give excuses for his doing. But you see, the problem I have with this approach is that in the first place, we have not come up with something that can definitely say this is good, this is bad. By simply saying God is the definition of good, then any definition you apply on God will automatically become good. So either good and bad are independent of God and man, or good and bad are dependent on God and man. In either case, the whole idea of objective morality, objective good, objective evil is thrown out of the window. But we can't, on the one hand, call for objective good and say we have no right to judge what we are seeing, yet on the other hand, proceed to call this good and evil subjective to some entity. So yes, we see some of these things as evil, and yes, we have a standard to judge by. The standard is a standard that is created by the societies we live in all their changes over the years. So while some societies may have looked at these acts as good, this current society, the society from which I stand and judge the rest of history, will look at them as bad.
Awesome. Thanks for seeing that I'm on video, meaning your time is up. So I think with that, without further ado, I can see our time is far much spent. I think I'll first of all thank both of you as well as our audience for being so engaging on this debate on evil and suffering, especially in light of African traditional view and Africa in general, because that is the essence of the Africa Debates channel, because we want to discuss these topics with Africa in mind, not just debating them from a Westerner perspective, but how does it really affect us as Africans in the context and in the society that we live in. So I'll thank you so much for everyone, the Secular Hangout. I can see a lot of engagement on YouTube. I saw Brian. So all of you, especially for your engagement on the live stream, Brian, that was nice. Maurice, Pavel, Rebecca, and all of us who had joined us also on the Zoom. And right now, I'll give both Charles and Ssemakula to maybe give a shout out on some of the channels or the blogs that they have, so that we can be able to wrap up the session having shared what we want to share. So with this, I'll give Charles again to start, and then Ssemakula will close it out.
Oh yeah, so I think I'll just be quick, a few seconds. So like I just love reminding guys that I'm part of a group together with Kevin, Apologetics Kenya, and they've inspired a lot of what we are doing. And so like and apologetics is pretty much giving a defense, it's a Greek word, a defense of your position. So you can just check out the Facebook page. There's a lot going on. There's even a certificate course, by the way. Even if you're an atheist, you can sign up. How about that? And we even wrote, there's a statement that was written on the Mackenzie issue. So like there's a lot going on social media with Apologetics Kenya. Please look up Apologetics Kenya. And then also, there is now this particular channel that that is hosting this. Maybe there are people who don't know that this is actually live stream. So after this, it's going to be recorded and it's going to be archived. So like there are several other videos that have been done, topics on colonialism, you name it, tribalism, even if you can believe it, and many other things. And so like even the LGBTQ issue that has been a hot button issue. So like, yeah, you can just visit the African Debates channel and look up more and subscribe, like, share. Yeah, and I'm hoping that this will lead to something. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Over to you, Ssemakula.
As you heard, Ssemakula, a lot of things. Unfortunately, I don't have all these brilliant things to show you at this particular moment. They'll come up. I'm a printer. I dabble in philosophy. I'm a searcher for knowledge, and a coder. I'm one of those guys you hear behind keyboards writing software to do strange things for you. A lot of my stuff is basically starting up to work now, but currently I'm interested in talking to people about changing lives. I'm talking to people about making this world a better place, whether from a religious point of view or from a non-religious point of view. And for the non-religious specifically, I am also what is called a humanist celebrant, which means I have trained to do non-religious ceremonies for things like marriages, funerals, child namings, and stuff like that. So if somebody wants to do a wedding and they don't want to have blessed water sprinkled on them, then I'm probably one of the first points of calls on such things. My website and stuff will be coming up in the next 6 months or so. It's a bit too early for me to put up. But if you watch this space, you will see what will come up. Oh, and then on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the name is the same. If you search for Ssemakula, you will find me. Or alternatively, you can search for Baba Jesus. You will find me there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Ssemakula. So I think because you said you don't have anything to share, I'll share something on your behalf. I hope this is your page. let it load.
Oh, yes.
That is your page.
That is my page.
Awesome.
This is my page. This is where I will go to the other pages.
Oh, nice. So I also hope you also find out whether humans are more interesting than machines. Sure, awesome. So at least I've shared something on your behalf so that there is some kind of similarity in terms of that. So, so thank you so much. Anything else to close off? Anything, Charles, you want to say before we close off? Now, not as a debater now.
Oh, nothing else. I guess maybe just stay tuned for more coming soon.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone
joining us. Something final like him?
Yes, please do, Ssemakula.
One thing I hope people are going to realize that unlike many atheists, I don't like debating. I prefer discussing. So in most cases, I want us to discuss, understand, get to know each other, and sort of understand each person's point of view, which I hope will lead to a better understanding. Because one of the problems we have, not only with religion, even with non-religion, is that we will sit down Muslims calling Christians kafirs and fighting them, Christians fighting Muslims doing this, both of them fighting the traditionalists or the atheists. And all this stems from a point of view that we do not talk to each other. We stay in our cocoons, my Christian cocoon, my Muslim cocoon, my traditional cocoon, my atheist cocoon. And since we don't talk to each other, we'll always look at the other one as the evil one, the other person. I try to encourage people talking through each other, getting out of your cool, seeing how the other people live, and maybe realizing that after all, they're just the same people like we are, the same desires, same problems, same feelings that all of us have.
Awesome. What a way to end it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ssemakula. That's the perfect way to end it. No more, no less, no dilution of that. So thank you so much. Thank you so much also, Pavel, for joining us for this session. So I really appreciate Ssemakula. So as I've already mentioned, this is also going to be there on YouTube. Most of the time, there's usually more views. People come and follow up on what we had as a debate later on. So continue sharing the link, check on the channel. And also we are going to create snippets of what was discussed and the key highlights of the debate on the channel. So with that, I'll end the stream and thank you. Have a lovely week ahead. Thank you.